start the meeting. We do not currently have a mayor pro tem, so the responsibility to run the meeting lies to the mayor at this point. And with that, we'll start with good of the order. Did anyone have anything for good of the order?
Oh, I guess I do.
Councilmember Langell.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I'm working on a couple different motions that would apply to items that are on our council agenda. So I wanted to make that known. And also I will give the finance committee update.
All right, thank you. Moving on to our scheduled items. First up is council meeting preview for discussion with our city administrator, Mr. Apple.
Thanks, everyone. What I figured was as we're looking at the cow as being a feeder, the place where we get work done to prepare for council, is it makes sense, you know, and if people don't like we can stop at the future, is to look at what we have coming up for a council meeting tonight and just see if there's any points where we say, oh, you know what, I don't know if we're ready for this yet. And that way we're already kind of prepared to say, well, let's maybe be prepared for that or not. So I don't know if Stephanie or Laura can bring up our agenda for the council meeting. But if you can, in the meantime, we have mayor's report. Remember, we have the fire district report tonight from Interim Fire Chief Erskine. I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry. Council report, sounds like we have one council report from Chairperson Langell. I don't know if anybody else has substantive reports coming in for council reports that are going to require a lot of discussion. We don't have a very large city administration update, unless Laura has something that I'm not sure of, but it'll be quick. But we do have 4 public hearings tonight. This capital improvement program for sewer, the general funds charges for sewer, which you've seen both those several times. I'm not sure, you know, how long they should take, but we've seen them both fairly a lot. Also seen the comprehensive plan amendments for public hearing 2. This is our second one, and then the Riverview School District school impact fee. So all 4 of those are not the first time we've seen them. Then we got new business. You all will have the pro tem appointment. We have legislative goals, which I think there were some minor additions to it, but they're essentially last year's goals with a couple of minor additions. Is that a true statement, Mayor?
That's correct.
The school impact fees, which I don't know if you're ready for a decision, although we have talked about them, and this is the second. Is this the second public hearing? Well, this is the public hearing that we just did. If you're ready for decision or direction. We have the police department contract amendment for prosecuting services. Lieutenant Saywern is going to be ready to talk about that. That's something I think we talked about before, which helps us with contracting amendment for prosecuting services. It's a contract that is sort of ready to go. The reserve officer resolution, that, if you remember, that has to do with the fact that our reserve officer in code was not how it was being done for quite some time. And we have talked to the union, and they're ready. They know they're comfortable, I think, that we're not that we're not engaging them in something that should go to full discussion for contract, that doesn't open them up. They're fine with that. Everybody's fairly comfortable as long as it stays the way that it currently is. Strategic fund resolution. I don't know how far along we are at that, if that's ready, if it's still on discussion, or whether that could be a decision or not tonight. The dental benefits, we have it as discussion. And again, I don't know if that's something that could be a direction or a decision tonight as well. Unfinished business. All of these we have gone over a few times, like the general facilities charge, the capital improvement program, water comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan amendments are all ones that we've done public hearings on, including tonight. A zoning map amendment. I think that one, I'm not sure if you've seen before, but it's a fairly straightforward one. I'm sure Laura will be able to give a good feeling about it. Or Troy has got on it. And then a property tax levy, which we've discussed several times, in the biennium budget. I'm not sure how much more we're going to discuss. I wasn't ready to talk about the ARPA position because I haven't done as much research. So there may be some other areas of that, of the other 3 positions that hadn't been discussed. If people have questions, otherwise, I don't know if Dana has more to I think there's a couple things that Dana has to add because of changes, and that's it. And we do have an executive session. That is more to give you information about our new clerk, which is more appropriate. And talking to our lawyer, he said this is the best way of doing it, and most appropriate and legal way of discussing vacation and some training money that we need to put towards her while she's in moving from Squim to here. So I just wanted to kind of outline this is what we've got going on tonight, because we got again a really full agenda tonight. And that's it.
Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, going through the let's see, sorry, I want to make sure I'm off off mute. I guess I am. Anyway, going through the agenda, there was a couple items that seemed to be the same or very similar, and that was under unfinished business items 4 and 5, both which reference AB 21-98B. Laura or Troy, if you're on, do you want to explain if there's a difference there, or they're the same thing or a subset of each other, or what we want to do there?
Yes, I can address that. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so good evening, Mayor and Council and members of our community. So these 2 items we would not be able to make a decision on tonight because we have not received a full recommendation from the Planning Commission body yet. But the comprehensive plan, 2 of the items are rezones, and when you do a rezone, you also have to approve a new zoning map. So they are together, but they have to be 2 separate actions. I see.
Okay, good. No, that helps me. Now, should we have heard this before last time. If there's nothing new, I would suggest we strike both of these from the agenda. Is there anything new on this?
Yes. There's a second public hearing to include the future land use map. And then we also report out what happens during the Planning Commission process and from their public hearing. So we wanted to share that. So yes, there's new information.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilmember Hoag.
So I noticed that some of the items say discussion and they don't say discussion or decision. So there could be some easy items on here, like maybe the dental one, that it doesn't say decision or discussion. So in that case, we're not supposed to really vote on them, correct? It just seems like a different format than we've done before.
Well, so when we're putting this together in our admin meeting, there's sort of a guesswork that do we think that the council will want to take action at this point or not? Or do we feel that so you can always just, with the exception of when you need a recommendation from a commission, or we need another public hearing, or there's some other legal mechanism that has to happen, you can make a decision at any time. These are more just what it's kind of for us as well to see where we think something is going to be already decided tonight or not, or whether it's still sort of in process. Yeah, so that's the short answer.
Great. Quick question for the group. Is there anything on unfinished business that folks would like to move to the consent agenda to save time tonight? I'm not seeing any. So unless there are any other questions for Mr. Oppel or any of the other staff, we'll go ahead and move on to our second item. It's the 2022 legislative agenda. And I will share my screen. So at this point, we internally modified the 2021 agenda to acknowledge 2022. We have very few changes, just a couple of additions to recommend. And I haven't heard anything from other council members, so we have nothing else included at this point. So as a quick refresher, we had transportation, in particular, a Highway 203 corridor study, as well as finishing 522 and North 405 improvements. While there was progress last legislative session, there's still a lot more work to be done. And then we had changes to transportation planning policy, and that's to address the cross-border issues that we have, especially with pass-through traffic. And then, of course, our standard broadband of additional investment in infrastructure. And then we had behavioral health funding and support. There was a lot of progress on that last year, but I think that still remains a high priority of most folks. And then under new items, under land use and regulation and growth management act changes, we have some additional recommended language. As you can see on the screen, this last sentence that says housing element guidance should be clear, concise, and timely to allow Duvall to begin its periodic update in early 2022. And an item here for the State Building Code Council. This is an issue that's been brought up in the planning directors, and our planning director strongly supports putting a statement in our agenda. The statement is that the city discourages the establishment of emergency administrative rules that impact local jurisdictions without a process that includes city and county building officials' participation in rulemaking. And Ms. Thomas can expand on this if you need to hear more, but in general, there's some challenges and shortages with equipment, et cetera, that the state is close to allowing potentially occupancy before certain key things are done, which would then make it very, very difficult for our staff to gain access to certify for final occupancy of the building. Ms. Thomas, did I get that one correct? Did I miss anything there? Got it? Okay. I'm trying to be as brief as I can with that one. Did council have any questions on that one?
Nope.
Apologize. Okay, not seeing any. Thank you. Trying to deal with a couple screens here. The next one is actually related to law enforcement. And this is something coming up through WASPEC and others. I think Mr. Apple had a big discussion about it with the city managers within the last couple of weeks. And this is removing unnecessary redaction of duplicative police body worn camera footage. And basically, this is simply trying to make sure that cities don't have to provide two versions of videos through discovery while somebody gets a redacted copy via public records request. This is a proposal that's coming forth from the city of Kent with the support of the Sound Cities Association. Mr. Oppel, is there anything you wanted to add to this one, or Lieutenant Saverin?
Yeah, Kent brought it up because they've spent in the last few months 140 hours doing redaction of video for lawyers who are on the defense, who are going to get an unredacted version, but they do a public public information request because they want to see whichever one gets the faster they can start using it. But it's costing money and they're going to get an unredacted. So what this allows them to do is, if it's a legal team which would be allowed to have unredacted video, we should just give, the city should just give them unredacted video because they know the requirements for protection of that data. and it just says, oh, if they go and do a public information request and you know that they're defense, you give them an unredacted version, which is the normal thing for discovery anyway. And it just saves, it's going to save time and money for the cities.
Question.
Councilmember Schaefer?
Yeah, do we still have to do a redacted version as well? If this passes or not?
You would only have to do a redacted version if someone who has the right to do a request for information and they're considered somebody who is a valid user of that video, because you can't just ask for any video you want. You have to be somewhat connected to that video. You could still do it even if you're not doing the defense, and then you would have to do redacted video. It's just for the people who would be allowed to get unredacted video, you don't have to do the redact. You won't have to do that. Then they just give them the unredacted. It doesn't negate the right of other citizens if they have standing to get redacted video.
Okay, good. So the bottom line is there, then we'd only have to redact a video if it was requested by somebody that had, as you say, had the authority to get that. Is that correct?
Yeah. If they have to have standing to get, for a public information request like that. But it would be somebody who has standing but is not in the defense. And so there's less number of people. Steve Savran could probably give you a better take on it, but there's not as many people who might need that who are not in the defense anyway.
Exactly. Okay, good. Thank you.
Right. And so that actually is the last change to the draft agenda. And of course, we still had just the acknowledgement of government facilities planning and designing. That language can be updated just a little bit to identify that we're in the middle of that process. But with that, I wanted to open it up for discussion, see if folks are supportive of the additions, if there's anything you want us to remove, and anything else to add to the agenda. Councilmember Lingle and then McHenry.
Yeah, it's really a question. I'm fine with what you proposed, but last legislative session, we had, 2 pieces of legislation which would disrupt the city zoning authorities. And it wasn't listed here. Is your feeling that since that's been part of AWC, we didn't need to have that concern on here? I'm referring to bills 1232 and 1220. I know they're floating around still there.
Yeah, we could add those specifically. I don't know that it's necessary. I think AWC is on top of them to the point where we should be watching the emails and monitoring and talking to our delegation to reiterate our position on them. But we could put it in the agenda, but I don't think it's necessary.
Okay, that's fine with me. I just wondered if we were going to just do our support for that through AWC. Thanks for answering.
Councilmember McHenry?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I support the additions and I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. All right. Well, that seems like a quick discussion. And then just a quick reminder, if we put any other capital budget type requests in, those will be separate from the agenda and highlighted in a different manner, just like we did with our facilities last year. So with that, quick question for the group, since we do have it on the agenda, are you interested in doing final approval tonight, or would you like to wait until the next meeting? Because if we're not going to do final approval tonight, I'll just pull it from the agenda at the beginning and then put it on the next one. Councilmember Schaefer?
You're talking about final approval in the council meeting. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes, and I am interested in that. Okay.
I'm seeing head nods, so unless I'm hearing objections, I'm going to assume that's the case, and we'll go ahead and move on. So next up, we have the mid-biennium budget presentation, discussion, and update with Ms. Mason, our finance director.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, Dana Mason, Finance Director. Can you see my presentation okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll just hop in here. So the first thing we'd like to discuss, the agenda is changes since the last council meeting. We'll talk about ending fund balances, and then we'll talk about what we've done so far and next steps. So for budget purposes, the auditor's office had provided direction to show that 2019-2020 building permit revenues less expenditures as a transfer from the general fund rather than the beginning fund balance. And that also applies to the approximate 216,000 in 2019-2020 sales tax from construction over the base amount plus the annual inflator threshold for the new strategic fund. However, this is just for budget purposes to show the transfer is a budgeted expenditure. For internal purposes, the city can still show the 2019-2020 amounts as beginning fund balances. Other changes, the reserve officer has been added as a 0.1 FTE in the salary schedules and the FTE schedules. There's no monetary change, or the FTE table, sorry. The additional compensation for lieutenants and sergeants is authorized by ordinance 1285 and unchanged. So our city attorney recommended removal from exhibit C, the 2022 salary schedule. And then there's been some changes to salary splits. The engineering department's splits were updated to include CIP hours and the additional work to reflect the additional work of the stormwater program coordinator. And then the admin 1 and admin 3 splits were updated to reflect actual time. For changes to revenue, since the last meeting, sales, we have more sales tax numbers. So sales tax and transportation benefit district sales tax have been updated to better reflect 2021 actuals. Storm drainage charges for services were increased to reflect estimated new 2022 utility customers. Insurance revenue, recovery revenue was added to the equipment replacement fund for some damaged police vehicles. There's the transfer into the street fund from the general fund was increased by $25,000 to reflect a change in staff allocations and then some internal charges for services. And then a general fund liquor excise tax, gambling tax, and tax from natural gas was increased also to reflect actual 2020 numbers. And this is something we just found out about. Paid family medical leave premiums were increased from 0.4% to 0.6%, with the city share, percentage share decreasing from 1/3 to 26.78%. But it does increase the cost a little bit, about $1,300 for 2022, so not too much. In IT, storage area network costs were increased from $10,000 to $15,000 just to reflect the rising IT costs. Positions, the new positions had laptops budgeted, and so $3,000 for laptops, and that includes monitors, docking station, and other accessories. And then $1,750 for desktops, which are quite a bit, they're less for setup. $3,000 was added to 2022 for prosecutor services. $1,000 was added for the increase in IT costs for field tablets for the building department. And then the city would like to purchase, added $47,000 to replace. So the number of vehicles would remain the same. The 2005 Crown Victoria, and this is the maximum cost. There may be some savings from equipment moving from one car to another. And then there were some changes to expenditures in the storm drainage fund. Factor truck rental costs were decreased. Debris disposal costs were increased slightly, and this is all in the storm drainage fund. Locate costs were decreased. Supplies were increased. They were actually omitted from the original budget. And then repair and maintenance costs were decreased slightly. And then last slide on expenditures, internal service fund charges for services and general fund overhead allocations were adjusted for all the changes for the FTE splits. And this is just a transfer out, which mirrors the transfer into the street fund. It was increased by $25,000 as mentioned earlier. And then the dental benefits at the last meeting, council express support to provide the orthodontia rider to non-represented employees, and that will increase the budget, the benefits cost by about $1,350 for 2022. And then this is just to look at the ending fund balance. So the actual beginning fund balance is down here, just over $26 million. You can see this is just for budget purposes, not for, but our internal reporting will show the beginning fund balance is right here. But you can see that the beginning fund balance for the general fund has increased substantially because we put the building and permit fund back up there. And then these are, you know, so it looks like there was a big decrease from beginning fund balance to ending fund balance, but council just needs, or we need just to remember that, you know, the general fund used to house the building and permitting fund, so that's been pulled out. This amount right here would have been in the general fund and actually will be rolled in there for reporting purposes. And then the contingency fund is also reported as part of the general fund for reporting source purposes. And then the process, so with the city had its public hearing. There was discussion and direction from council on November 2nd. Today, there's discussion and hopefully some direction and possibly even action. And then we still have another opportunity to discuss the budget at the December 7th meeting. And then final action would need to be on the December 21st meeting, or possibly the December 14th meeting if that time frame changes. And then I'll just look over to our last slide. Just a reminder that these are the 6 proposed positions that council, or that are in the modified budget. And I'll just leave it right here for discussion.
Great.
And questions.
Councilmember Lingle.
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question. In some of the materials we have positions stated as starting January 1. And of course, we know that positions actually get hired after that point. So I was a little confused about how you budget it, just because we have information in 2 different ways. So when you budget, I guess the question for Director Mason is, when did you start in your actual expenditure, since we're on a cash basis, when the funding would start to proceed for the positions, the 6 positions, because you're not going to have them January 1, obviously. So.
Yeah, well, the hope is if we got authorization, then we could get close to January 1. But that's, you know, that may not be possible. But the ARPA program coordinator, assistant city engineer, the communications manager, and the police clerk were all budgeted start for the full year. The stormwater coordinator was budgeted to start in July, and then the police recruit was simply put in as a 0.5 FTE.
Right, that's what I thought. So if we, so basically the proposal, if altered, you would adjust the numbers then for the things that we don't expect to start January 1, and or our consideration is delayed.
We could do that, yes. If council wanted us to like move a couple of these positions out a few months in 2022, we could definitely change the budget to reflect that.
Yeah, and one of the things we discussed at our work meeting on Monday was different ways that positions can be considered. And a tool we had used before was giving the nod to positions, but withholding funds from actually being released, which would allow more discussion in positions that have outstanding questions. So I wanted to be sure that I mentioned that from today's or Monday's meeting. We have used that method before, and it's I think it was successful, but I don't know. Maybe I think operations felt it was successful. They knew the money was there. They just had to bring back the additional information.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. Councilmember Schaefer?
Yeah, I'm still concerned that we're going to get hung up with this before we can actually make a decision, as long as all 6 of these positions are in the same bill. So my question is there a process, perhaps through a motion in the council meeting, not obviously not in the COW, where we can break these out separately and then approve not only the positions, but each individual position and the funding for that position, or on the other hand, delay the decision for a future meeting. Is that a possibility? Would a motion be the way to accomplish that if it is?
Go ahead, Mayor, sorry.
I was going to say that's one way that you could do it. It's probably actually most simple to approve the positions and put a budget note in place. Budget notes are used often to identify restrictions on when funds can be used, and historically that has been what we've used at the city, and other jurisdictions do it quite often as well. So if the council is thinking that ultimately you're likely to approve all these positions, the easiest thing would be to approve it all in the budget so that finance doesn't have to come back with more amendments next year, and put some budget notes to that. I'm not sure, budget notes could be by motion, could be by an amendment to the ordinance. There's different ways of doing it.
Okay. And I'm not sure the council is, ready to approve all these positions. There's still, I think most of us realize there's still some contention on at least a few of these. On some of the others, there is less contention, or perhaps even no contention. Those are the ones I'd like to move along. I'd like to get off the table, just approve the position and approve the funding for that position.
Yeah, and so on that, oh, sorry, council member, I was just going to share that the other way in the budget, since it is in the ordinance, council can make an amendment to the ordinance to pull those positions out. So that's the other option.
I see. So we would pull out the positions that we're not ready to vote on then, is that correct?
Yes, you could do that, and then the budget would have to be amended to reflect that. So if those things are brought back in 3 or 6 months, then you'll need to do more budget adjustments and the formal motion of approvals of the position. So having them lumped, as many as possible lumped in together, is an efficiency issue. It's time and everything else as well.
Okay.
Councilmember.
Yes, I'm in support of, we discussed this at the last meeting, and it was clear that all of them had, we needed every position here. So I think for efficiency, it would make sense to put it in. Therefore, you have the numbers there to look at and be a guidance for you. And then there's always a flexibility to, if council wants to alter that, or with the budget note, make that amendment that they need to do, whatever it is they want to do with that position. But I think for efficiency, and so that you can look at your budget honestly and clearly, I would recommend, from my point of view, my suggestion is that we just do that to make it more efficient, because there's always flexibility to change our minds on that.
So that, sorry, Diane, question if I can. But I want to understand exactly what that means. So we would approve the agenda bill, but hold the funding for each of these positions. Is that correct?
With a budget note, what you would do is that you would have to require, a budget note will often require council approval for use of the funds. So, or filling of a position. So, for example, Mr. Lenashevsky could provide some detail on his parks positions. They were in the budget, but we had to come back to council several times before we had authorization to hire that position.
Okay.
Councilmember Lingle and then Councilmember Napland.
Just to continue your comment there, Mayor, is we looked at the idea of budget notes before, and what happened before was we opted instead to build in the reservation of the funds into the actual council document as opposed to just letting them be notes. That's what we chose before. So it's more in keeping with your last description of not just being notes. Your first one was just being budget notes. But the other, this is just something else I've been thinking about, which is a bit on the same topic and has to do with one of my concerns is that normally we all know, normally we don't have a bunch of positions in a mid-buy as budget amendments. This is quite unique. And it's a lot of money in the scheme of the long range. And one of my concerns is that we have a new council member coming on board. And if we were to take action on all of this, they aren't really part of the budget process at all, but they're going to be involved in the things that follow that. So, you know, I have other reasons too, but I keep thinking about that new council member that's coming on board. And some of these things are, as Council Member Schaefer said, there's questions about, I don't know if the word is controversy, but we're not resolved on them. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm inclined to have some of the positions further considered in the first part of 2022. Because I just don't think that we'll be able to resolve everything within the December timeframe. And there's really no reason why we can't resolve some of these positions in the first part of 2022. And I like the idea of voting on each of the positions individually.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingo. Councilmember Napland.
Curious if administration has any more information about potential options for some of these positions. I know at the last meeting, the ARPA program coordinator, you know, there was acknowledgement from administration that that was an awful lot of an expense out of the ARPA money. It was, I think, well over 20% would directly go to just one position to oversee the money, and that seemed pretty high, and it sounded like administration was going to look into alternatives. I'm not sure if there's going to be a later presentation or if this is the time to hear from administration. And in addition, I think there were a lot of questions about the communications manager. We're taking duties that were done, you know, just on a, you know, very limited amount of time on some employees that are no longer, well, one employee that's no longer with us, and turning it into a full-time position. And I think there were questions about, are there some alternatives? There's other council priorities that if we're going to add an entire position to the general fund, what else could be accomplished with that position? I threw out some ideas. I also threw out some ideas, you know, in the pre-agenda meeting and via email. And, you know, I'm not sure if administration has any response to that. I'm just looking for creativity. The city has a lot of needs, and adding a position is quite expensive, especially to the general fund. And if we could, you know, like I said, we have a lot of goals: economic development, community outreach. You know, it'd be nice to be able to get some other things out of a position.
Mr. Oppel, if you have anything to add.
Well, I said yesterday before, and I said earlier today, is the ARPA one. I still haven't done as much. I don't have a number for you. I won't really be able to give a number exactly for how much if we went with a contracted position, because until you do an RFP and you get a response back from an RFP, you really won't know exactly how much that position would be. But it's something we can, I can look at talking to them and see if I can get a ballpark figure. But I still have to talk to. I've only found two firms around who have promoted themselves to doing. One's called Beacon. The other one is Management Partners, who is doing Lake Forest Park. Sorry. And so I need to talk to them and get a feel for what their ballpark is for fees. I think there's another positive with going with a consultant is if we have to have a single scope audit afterwards, they're still there. Whereas if we have a position, they won't be there unless we hire them for something else. So they won't be there to support us. So
are you saying that you aren't necessarily recommending the full-time position that you are?
I'm not recommending anything right now. I'm just saying I need to do more due diligence. It is more. It is more of a thing with ARPA than a normal grant manager's position. So having a larger number is also expected if we do it in-house. And some places have done it in-house and some places are not doing it in-house. Even Tacoma is hiring a separate, that's a big city, so they don't feel they can do it in-house. So I don't know. I think we need to look at some different options, but I can't just in 1 week or 2 weeks just give you something. And even then, it'll still have to go to an RFP, which means we won't know until we get the responses back exactly how much it costs. So that the ARPA one is still kind of up in the air, although we do need to move, it's with some speed with it, because we have to start moving, on the stuff. We have to have all funds obligated by 2024. With communications manager, yep, there are potentials of doing it. I would be concerned about bringing a person on which already has 5 different roles, because then they're not really doing things. But if we can have some identified roles that fulfill both communications and something else that is a compatible job, obviously like an ecologist and a communication manager probably are not really. That's not compatible. And that's kind of what we did before. We had police officer doing sort of communication. We had, somebody in public works doing communication. We had a city clerk doing communication. None of those are directly compatible. They do their little portion, but it'd be nice to have somebody who focuses on it, as well as having another compatible job. But that's a potential.
Yeah, so you maybe just were using kind of an extreme example. I didn't say ecology, I said economic development. I was using an extreme example, say it needs to be. I wasn't saying that yours was a bad example. I was saying there could be bad examples. We have to make sure it fulfills more than just the communications portion. It should fill, but it also has to be a compatible one. It can't just be, I honestly, police clerk / communications. I don't think that's a great mix. Because they're the one is focused very much on police and public service, and the other one is more broadly focusing outward on communication. So economic development maybe, policy analyst maybe, but we also have to make sure that we're fulfilling some of the overarching goals for the whole city and for what these are. So I guess for me, it seems like there's a lot of outstanding questions for those 2 positions, even from administration. There's more work needs to be done. So perhaps those would definitely be ones we would want to put some kind of budget note or hold on those funds until we have more discussion and talk about priorities. So that's the feedback I'm going to give in relation to those positions.
Councilmember Hoag and then Councilmember Lingle.
I really appreciate that you have brought all these positions to us at once, because it really, when you bring them periodically throughout the year, then we can't see the total impact. And this is really helpful having them all at once. But it also does make you try and kind of analyze them like we're doing and say, okay, should we pull some of these out? I think I worry about doing a budget note, because then it really gives the go ahead to start all the work. So I think it's better to pull 2, maybe 3 of the positions out and bring them back, because you've already got them ready for us. We just might need some additional information, but bring them ready, bring them back to us in 2 to 3 months, or because it seems like the ARPA one for sure will need to give more input on that position. It doesn't feel like it's ready, and maybe even the communications manager. One thing I've been thinking about that job is that it would be nice to find out what would be the requirements for the person taking on that role. You know, what kind of education, and I think that's a very important role. And I'd love to have more information about that one as well. But that's just my thought on, I'd rather see them pulled for the current discussion or decision, I would say, because I don't think we can decide on them today.
Councilmember Langell, and then Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, on the communications manager, I really appreciate what our city administrator was saying, because I lined all the positions up, and we still have community outreach communications functions in some of the other positions. And so I think of communications probably a little differently, but not dramatically differently. That communications person is our ambassador out to the neighborhoods in terms of our public message. And that involves not just, public information requests or something like that. It involves a real range of things. And yet we still have community outreach kinds of functions in individual positions. Stormwater is one of the ones that caught my attention. And, when you're promoting a new program, it doesn't necessarily have to be the stormwater person. They prepare the materials, and the communications manager, or whatever it would end up being called, is out there working that program as part of their ambassadorship to the neighborhood. So I see I agree that the ARPA position and communication manager position, that was one of my other thoughts, is that those are really better considered after the first of the year 2022, while some of these items can be flushed out. And but it's not like, what I'm saying is those things don't have merit. On the ARPA position, it really depends a lot. Time frame on that really depends a lot on how big and complicated an ARPA program we want. If we want a very focused series of investments that are tied to our capital improvements, it's not going to be a big lift. So maybe a consultant works just fine, and then the funds are reserved for public works and the people actually doing those things. So I really would like to see those two get discussed in 2022. And then the last comment, everybody knows the subject near and dear to my heart, which is another engineer in public works. We haven't talked about that. I see that there's no check on that. But I guess I'll just keep making an appeal that both in public works and in the building department, development in the city is not going to subside anytime soon. And so we pay a lot of money for on-call consultants to help with some of these things. And I think having another engineer in public works would be tremendously beneficial to us over the next few years, because development simply is not going to stop. And I mean, that's just the reality of where we are.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Schaefer. And then we have not heard from Councilmember McHenry.
So this is a question for council. If we amend the budget, amend the agenda bill, remove the ARPA program coordinator and remove the communications manager, the remaining 4 positions, the stormwater program coordinator, police recruit, assistant city engineer, and police clerk, would remain in the agenda bill, plus, of course, all of the other biennium budget adjustments. are we ready to vote tonight on that amended agenda bill? I am, and I want to hear from the other council members if you feel you're ready or not. And by the way, what I mean by voting on these positions would include the approval of the budget, not any kind of a budget note or budget hold.
Thank you, Councilmember Schaefer. I do want to hear from Councilmember McHenry because we have
Yeah.
not heard from her yet. Go around the horn.
Thanks. I've just been enjoying all this discussion. I've heard a lot of things I agree with. Councilmember Schaefer talking about pulling out things we're just not sure on, because I agree it's just not realistic to think we're gonna, get through the discussion on some of the ones we're not all quite there on with the time we have left this year. So I think it'd be better to just focus on what we can all agree on at this point, but definitely continue the discussion. I think, I just wanted to say that I understand, I want to understand for a position like the communications manager, how it fits into the longer term vision for the city. I know I can get there, but I think my hang up on it honestly is not, do we need it, but where is it? If we had a master plan or map for where we're going in the end, and then this is an obvious next step. Okay, now we're filling this role. Okay, and after that, we're going to fill this role. It would make it a lot easier, because I've heard a lot of positions that we should have over the years. And so I don't know what's coming next. A lot of these are really big jumps for us. And I think it's great that we're talking about, our concerns. So I think for me, that is my main hang up, is where does that fit into the long-term roadmap for Duvall? And then, with ARPA, I struggle with it, I think like everybody, because the overhead would just be, it's just such a big percentage. So I would really love to understand, I get with the consultant idea or other creative ideas, that's good, but is it also just a possibility that there's some simple, obvious uses that we can plug in and use as much money as possible? May not be the most glamorous, but just whatever we can do to minimize that cost. And then lastly, I just wanted to really put in a plug again for police clerk. I really believe in that position 100%. I think now is really the time to invest in our police department. And it may not seem like a huge deal, but I just think it would help relieve some of the clerical work there and just provide a really big benefit to the entire department.
Thank you, Councilmember McHenry. Mr. Apple has his hand up.
Yeah, it was just a quick response. One of the things that you're kind of getting towards is a workforce analysis, which we do need to do. And that includes really get down, figure out what roles are being fulfilled correctly, what ones are not, because we're kind of splitting up work over several FTEs. I honestly, just looking at our workload, I don't believe they're going to say, oh gosh, you're overstaffed. They're going to look at it and say, you're not properly aligned. And so I agree with you, that's the thing. But I also don't want to say, well, let's wait till that's done, because we definitely have a requirement for more work than what we can do. If you look at our overtime hours, we're not underutilizing people, we're burning them out. So I know we have more work to be done in this. This is just start of a process, but I understand also that, yeah, we do have to do a bigger analysis of what do we still need to move towards? What are we going to be short on, even with some realignment? We still are going to probably be short with some, because we're growing so as a city. So there's going to be some points that we can realign and then work towards. But I concur.
Councilmember McHenry.
Just a quick follow-up. And sorry if I don't remember this, maybe it was said, what do we have a timeline, or can you remind me of the timeline for completing that workforce analysis?
It hasn't been started yet. There's been too many other things that have bumped into that work. And so it has not been able to be completed. That was part of what we had hoped the interim city administrator would be able to do. But other things of council business needed more attention.
Do we
So
do we know what the timeline is though for when it could be started?
Mr. Apple, you can answer that a little bit better.
So I don't think he's done an RFP. We really need to have somebody to look at it from honestly, the best way of doing it is their externals. They come in, they're very good at workforce analysis. They look at jobs and hours and tasks and start doing it. I don't have even a beginning of an RFP, but we'd have to do an RFP. I think it would not be unreasonable to think that we could have one begun in spring if we did an RFP fairly soon, if everyone was really in agreement for it. But there's going to be a cost to that, and I don't remember if it was been budgeted or not, because I'm sorry I wasn't here when it was discussed last year. If it has been budgeted, then we really just need to go to RFP and see whether we're underneath our projected budget. Dana, it looks like she was shaking her head yes, that we was budgeted. So we could put an RFP out and see if it is under the budget amount. If it's over the budget amount, we'd have to go and make an adjustment. But yeah, we can start doing an RFP in the next, as we move forward.
Councilmember Lingle and then Napland.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about positions here, and it's awesome. But there are other little things in the budget that are probably worthy of discussing. But to Councilmember Schaefer's point, I do think I'm a little worried about the police clerk, not because I don't want to support the police clerk, but I just want to know how that would interrelate with the communications function, since part of what that clerk needs to do is deal with records and the whole body cam thing that's going on. I mean, as it was discussed. So there are some other little things, but one thing I just wanted to ask with all of the positions is, and Councilmember Hoag touched on this, is the way these have been presented to us. What I don't understand is, no, I shouldn't say I don't understand. What I would like to see is when these position descriptions are finalized, that all the positions have statement of qualifications, education, if there's any additional certifications that are needed or required or desired. I want to make sure that that's with all of these positions, because that's the way we can be sure a workflow analysis and the salary study is really looking at comparatives. And, with the 2 project manager positions that were provided, for example, there really isn't any information on that. So I just want to be sure when we finalize positions that will be on their job descriptions.
Right. Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. And I think Councilmember Schaefer did ask a question of the group, and we're not getting to the answer that he's looking for. So I'm going to try and steer us back there. It sounds like there is not support at this moment to move forward the ARPA coordinator or the communications manager, and that folks want that to come back at the beginning of the year. But it does sound like there's at least lukewarm support for the other 2 positions that were not decided on at the last meeting. And I want to confirm that. So if you do not agree with that, please let me know right now.
Mayor, if I may, I'm sorry. I think Councilmember Napland had another comment or question.
Okay. So can we get through that first one first, and then get back to her, and then get back to your original question?
Yes.
So is there anyone that objects to Councilmember Schaefer's proposal of including the police clerk and the assistant engineer in this budget and coming back at the beginning of the year with the other 2 positions? I'm not seeing any objections to that. Councilmember Napland, and then we'll go back to the other question, because I think Councilmember Schaefer is trying to help the body get to a point of a budget decision. So I want to engage where people are at with that. Councilmember Napland.
Yeah, I had forgotten in my earlier comments to give a big shout out to Director Mason and Director Laniszewski, because they put in an awful lot of work, putting in some ideas that had been brought forward of applying some of the allocations to the capital projects. We have a really big, strong capital CIP list, and those capital funds can be used to pay for staffing. And I know a ton of effort was put into that. It made you know, some of the internal transfers have to change. That was a huge lift. And I think it was well done. And I was thankful to see that. So I did have one other question for Director Lenashevsky, and it's a follow-up on what Councilmember Langle mentioned, is the engineer position and our reliance on outside consultants. Is it likely that we would see some offsetting of cost if we had another engineer in-house on some of those consultant charges?
Good evening, council staff, any citizenry out there, Steve Lenashevsky. So I think to maybe Mr. Oppel's, I don't know, he made the point directly, but I won't commit to that yet because I'm not sure how right-sized we are. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of things. You know, the 3 slides I have on stormwater that I brought back, if we wanted to peek at those, I don't know if they made it into the packet, but we can share that out. You know, just there's so many people, I think Kevin mentioned it, you know, doing so many different things. It's so hard to understand. Now, typically, a direct example to answer your question partially, you know, from the last meeting, I spent, what, 28 grand getting MSA to help us do work that, you know, Mr. Tozer had been assigned. So there are assignments of work. It is also relative to how much capital programming we're putting out there. So we do need people to manage people. I know it sounds odd and redundant, but, you know, Gavin and I are working to keep the lights on right now and keep things moving as crippling as they can be, which is pretty ugly in here, but we're trying, and you just need people to make, you know, work happen. So I think it certainly can help. I think we're on the right track. And at the last meeting, you know, priorities for us, there's so many new regs and so many new obligations for stormwater that we need that for sure. Like if I have to pick one, I pick that. But to get the other assistant in here will certainly aid in deploying the immense amount of programming we have. Because I think, like you mentioned, like there's a lot of money in our capital plans, and there's a lot of work we need to get done, and there's a lot of work we want to get done. No one's arguing that, you know. So not everybody's on the same page per se on what we want to do versus need to do, right? We have to prioritize, but there's lots to do. So I think it will help. And, you know, thank you for your comment on allocations. I know Dana worked really hard. We went through that. You know, Kevin picked on some things on some of the admin staff and tried to right size their setting. But I think there's plenty of room, and we were very conservative to twist those dials. You know, I probably could keep someone busy for 3 years on water projects, 100% of the time, right? So I think we can even improve some of those allocations in the budget that exist to those funds that are not utility based, and kind of suck away from them and put more on the utility. But we really tried to be reasonable,
right,
and make it real for now, knowing we can always adjust to the better for the general funds setting. So I think, you know, obviously sewer has a boatload of work. Storm drain has such miscellaneous things that we really need the person to help, which we were able to kind of extract some of the expenditures and operations and push it to the person to then kind of twist the work around. So I think there's plenty of that yet to come.
The reworking of the stormwater position was just great. I really appreciate you moving some of that stuff around too. I didn't mention that. It wasn't just the capital. You did a lot of work on that stormwater position too. Anyway, really, thank you.
We're not chasing as many grants as, you know, that are out there. There are other things to chase. So I think there's hay will be made, but it won't be immediately recognizable through the budget. I had one more thing, but my brain's about it over today. I think there's more developer billing too, and that's, in my opinion, one of the easier things to offset in direct cost is keeping some of that more in-house. Certainly there's technical elements on survey and meets and bounds and closures that just, it's better to have someone does it every day, do it. But, you know, inspection, reporting, plan review, coordination, meetings, site work, like, you know, I was soaked to the bone yesterday out there at 6 p.m. It should have been a young engineer, not me. So there's the development revenue too can certainly be, again, offset. And we were very, and I know this, you know, you said it too, Councilmember Naflin, it bothers you. We're too conservative sometimes. and we're not intending to be, but I hope you can appreciate, we're kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't. But we have to be somewhere. So we try to be conservative on revenue and expenditures, erring in the side of there's usually going to be more of what we need available. So I know it's hard because we're not trying to overinflate anything, either in a revenue or an expense, but we have to start somewhere, and we try to be worst case, right? So there you go.
Mr. Apple has his hand up.
Yeah, it's just a little bit to pile on Steve, although he said a lot of, really, really key things is if we were getting done everything we needed to get done, and we're staying ahead of the power curve and we had all of our projects, you'd be correct. We'd be able to take off some of the expenditures that are going outwards to consultants. But I think, as Steve said in a much more succinct way, or much more, detailed way, and I'll put it succinctly, is we still are trying to catch up. And while we're trying to catch up, this person won't be, oh, well, we can take the work off of the consultants. We're still behind. So it's just going to, it's just added workforce, but it doesn't actually get us ahead of the, hopefully in the long run, this will get us ahead of the power curve. But right now, it's not going to, you're not going to see all of a sudden a dramatic drop in those charges, unfortunately. But hopefully we can get to a point where that would be a true statement. We won't need them. We only need them for very specific reasons.
And we will never be a production facility, right? We're not going to crank out a 300-page plan set in specs, but small things, certainly with some consultant support. We've done it in-house plenty before. Things haven't always been this busy before. But again, our problem is we have money to fix things. We're getting other grant money. Like, I just got a notice on the 142nd grant, like, it's okay, you're ready to go get it. And I'm like, oh, great, perfect. Like, so could be worse, but there's a lot to do.
Thank you. All right, so getting back to the second half of Councilmember Schaefer's question. The ARPA position and the communications manager are pulled out for further discussion at the beginning of the year. Are folks comfortable with moving forward with all of the items that need to be approved for the budget and approving the budget? So I'm seeing mostly head nods. Councilmember Lengyel.
Yeah, I just wanted, again, that clarification I asked about in the very beginning. We're not going to be hiring these people as of January 1. So I'd like to see the budget numbers adjusted to reflect a more realistic hiring schedule. And I don't know if that's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. That's up to, I'd be open to whatever administration thinks is real, but I don't want to over budget either. But otherwise, I'd be fine with the 4 going forward for a vote.
All right, thank you. Mr. Laniszewski, you have your.
I was just curious if Dana had the little graphic for deploying the staff members. Remember we had that little Gantt chart, Dana? I don't know if you have it handy, but.
I'll go grab it.
Yeah. If we're moving on, it doesn't really matter. But we staggered it all in to try to be reasonable should you get everything and understand what is possible when with recruiting, interviewing, praying you can get somebody to fill the role that can do the job.
Yeah, and I guess to your point also, which I'm glad you mentioned, is, we've got a lot of big stuff out there. We've really never thought through an informal priority list. We just kind of been going at rapid pace. So it'd be nice to see a little bit of breathing space for public works for the special projects. Like if we can create that breathing space, I just can't imagine doing everything you have to do on the inspection and so forth side and 3rd Avenue and Old Town and it's just huge what the agenda is for public works.
So I could adjust the budget for the next meeting to reflect this chart if council would like.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, so we have consensus, so that's good. We've got 2 more items that hopefully we can get through pretty quickly on this agenda. And then for budget approval at the next meeting, I'll just encourage folks to expedite some of the routine budget items that are on our agenda this evening so that we'll have less to deal with at the next meeting. So moving on to the utility and late fee shutoff deferral for discussion and update, Ms. Mason. And we may have to push the fee and charges resolution to the main meeting because we are running late at this point at 6:45.
Okay, good evening again, Dana Mason. I'll go through this as fast as I can. So this is just this first slide is just a quick history. Governor Inslee issued the proclamation prohibiting utility shutoffs and late fees in March 2020. And in October 2020, City Council authorized a minimum of $20,000 up to $35,000 in the CARES Act funded utility assistance grants to the residents of Duvall. Just under $7,000 in grants were distributed. In July 2021, City Council authorized the use of $47,000 in ARPA-funded utility assistance grants to the residents of Duvall. 16,000 or just over 16,000 in grants were distributed. And September 30th, 2021, utility shutoffs and the moratorium expired on utility shutoffs and late fees. And then the city offered 12-month payment plans to utility customers with past due balances. 14 customers have now entered payment plans. On October 28th, 2021, the city sent out past due notices for the first time since March of 2020. 344 notices were sent out, which is an average amount compared to pre-COVID-19 times. As of today, 85 of those customers have not paid their past due balances, and it's about 20 more than the 65 of the customers have history of past due balances. So it's about 25 or 20 more than normal. The city does offer a low income discount. 55 of the city's 2,968 utility customers receive the low income discount. 17% receive a 10% discount. 16 receive a 15% discount, and 22 receive a 20% discount. And here's just a chart of the thresholds for discounted utility rates. It's in the agenda packet, and it's established by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the city updates this chart annually. So staff is looking for, council had asked staff to look at some options for utility assistance. Some ideas are to mandate, city mandate to stop late fees and or the water shutoffs. The city could waive the late fees and the water shutoff fees, but still send out the notices. We could alter the city could alter the threshold for discounted utility rates, but we'll just need to look into the legality of that, or alter the percentage offered for discounted utility rates. Again, we would have to check with the city attorney to see if that's legally possible. The city could offer another round of ARPA-funded utility assistance. There's still money left in the $47,000 that was initially authorized, or look into a discount for senior residents. Currently, the discount is available to all households, not just seniors. Just open for discussion.
Any questions or comments for Ms. Mason? Councilmember Schaefer? Oh, you're on mute, Councilmember.
Thank you. If the council takes no action, then we would maintain our existing discounts. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, which are updated annually.
Okay, so no action is a possibility with this. And a second question: are we looking for action tonight at the council meeting or not?
Just direction. If you'd like staff to look into any of these options.
Okay.
Councilmember
or other
McHenry.
options.
Well, sorry, are you waiting for direction from us, or is there already a question out to legal on the two options where you said you're unsure if it's legally possible? Are we just waiting on an answer from Daniel, or have we not asked yet?
Yeah, we haven't asked because I don't want to expend legal funds, and you're like, we're not even interested in that. There's no reason. So we're trying to get an idea of which one of these options are interesting so that we could do more work and expend more time and which is money on whichever ones, or none of them. If you say, look, we're good with that number, 85 is not that much higher than 65, we're fine. We just want to get a little bit of direction before we continue on any route.
Councilmember Langle.
When you say the eligibility threshold for the various discounts, what percentage of median are you using?
It's the HUD is the one who does it.
No, I know, but there's different categories. There's the very low income, there's low income, and there's
I
moderate income.
understand. I'm just saying HUD is the one who describes it. I don't know which one that they use for this. And I don't, and our legal question is whether it's prescriptive or not. Because if it's prescriptive, then it really doesn't matter what we would like to do, because we're not allowed to change because they've given direction. I don't know. We could look into it to find out whether they use lower to lower mid housing, or lower to lower mid as their baseline. I would be surprised if they don't use lower to lower mid and lower mid, which is what they use for CDBG funding. I would assume it's probably fairly similar, but we can look into that if we think that that's something a route we want to go down.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked is because constitutionally, we can't go over 80% of median anyway. And I would agree that the block grant threshold of very low income, I think that's 30% of median. And then I think the next cut is 50% of median is probably where most programs sit, because 80% of median is still pretty high, even though, it's not enough in our region. So that's why I asked the question. I'm betting it's under 50% of median.
Councilmember Nathland.
So about a year ago, I went through and did a survey of a lot of the neighboring cities about what their discount rate programs were. And I created a spreadsheet. This was a real passion of Mount Ayers, and we started sort of working on some ideas. And what I've seen with other cities is their discount is substantially higher. And I think there's room to be more generous here. And I hope we can look at this a little closer. I also provided to administration yesterday that spreadsheet of the matrix of all the different cities. And there's a link on the MRSC website. And I can send that to the rest of council too, that describes what you can and can't do with these utility rate discounts. But I think there is more work to be done here. And the other thing that came up, this actually was part of a discussion a year ago in regards to an ordinance that was brought forward that never ended up going anywhere. It was about if there's a property that doesn't have water or sewer connection, that there'd be penalties and different things. And the issue is that we were having some squatters on properties. And I don't know if this is now ringing a bell, but what came out of it is we weren't ready to adopt a new ordinance for that, because we had other questions about how that was going to impact our current policies for utilities with water shutoffs and things like that. And so there was a plan, I thought, to come back based on the discussion when I listened to that meeting, to look at our timeline for late payments, late fees, shutoffs, how that all worked. And when I was watching the meeting earlier, it sounded like Stephanie Goodwin was working on some proposals to clean that up and make it more streamlined and make it easier for our ratepayers to understand with the timeline. So I don't know if that's something that's still being worked on, but the shutoffs were happening a lot sooner, it seemed, in our city than in other cities, and it was really confusing how the timeline was and how the letters being sent out and the door hangers. And I thought administration was hoping to come forward with some ideas to solve that. So I don't know where we are with that portion, but I would like to look at this more, and I'm open to making some changes.
Yeah, we're still looking at it. You're talking, that's a programmatic change, a
Mhm.
policy change. So Stephanie has given me what the current procedure is,
Mhm.
what our currently approved policy is,
Mhm.
and there's a concern that I have, not that it's not clear, but that people can be confused by it.
Yeah.
You get a late notice, and
Mhm.
that late notice, when you pay it, you may still have more money that you owe, and they don't ask the question, is this everything? I will say, I mean, it is part of a ratepayer's responsibility to say, is this paid
Yeah.
for this or that? We can try to make it more clear, but that will take a policy change, which means we need more time to work on that, because we want to make sure that we're not things that has to be staffed through, Steve and his people and everyone, to make sure that it makes sense before we just say, well, let's propose this policy and then find out it has some problems with it for execution.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion on this item tonight? Because we are at 6:56. We can bring it back to another meeting.
Mayor, I
Councilmember
got a quick
McHenry,
one.
it looks. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councilmember.
I just quickly wanted to say that I really appreciate getting options. I think everyone would probably agree with that. I don't see anything here that I am not interested in looking at more. So I don't know if anyone else has any that they're like, I don't want to look at that anymore. But for me, they are all interesting, and I'd just like to hear more about them and consider different combinations potentially too.
All right, thank you. All right, so with that, we are adjourned, and we will resume after a 5-minute recess. So we'll plan to start the meeting at 7:02.